Welcome on in, golf fans. It's your boy Gsluke here with our course breakdown for this week's Arnold Palmer Invitational. Going to take a look at Bay Hill Club and Lodge, tell you everything you need to know about the venue to go out there, get your DFS or betting research started so you can go out there and have yourself a week. We'll talk about some of the course specifics, some of the details you want to keep an eye on, a little hole-by-hole breakdown, and then some of my key stats and comp courses around the PGA Tour that play similar to what to expect this week so you can go out there and again get your research process started. So a lot to get into here. Let's go ahead and start it off with some of our course details around Bay Hill Club and Lodge. If you thought PGA National was difficult, well, this week things are going to be cranked up even more than what we had for the Cognizant. This is a golf course with longer rough than what we had at PGA National. It's also got faster greens and tends to play even firmer and faster than what we have for last week's event. So this year, of course, the Cognizant played a little bit softer than what we're used to seeing, but this golf course is a step above even that when it comes to how torturous it can be. And on top of just the long rough, you have a lot of strategy that you have to consider around this course, a lot of risk and reward, as you'll see at a lot of Arnold Palmer designs. And overall, with the field strength that we have, is why it is such an entertaining event. Pretty much every year, we have a packed leaderboard, oftentimes like 8-9 players that have a chance to take it home. And whoever ends up having the best ball striking, right, making a few putts out there on Sunday usually doesn't win by very much. So it should be a fun week. I would expect to see a lot of those same factors, but just like we had at the Cognizant, is going to be a little bit softer up there in Orlando. The whole state has had a lot of rain here in January and February, and now that we're into the beginning months of March, not a lot of that has dried out. So maybe they've had a better time of it in terms of trying to get this more golf ready, but I would expect to see it a little bit more receptive this time around, and for scoring to not be great. I mean, this is still going to be an extremely challenging track, but maybe slightly better than what we've seen over the last 2 or 3 seasons. But a few things to note before we move on to the hole-by-hole breakdown. This is a par 72, so it is a difficult golf course despite having 4 par 5s. So that's another reason why the scores can get out of hand here. Is there's a lot of shots that you have to hit, right? It's not your normal par 70 where we normally see some of our harder courses. It is a par 72, which makes it a little bit rare. It's also relatively long, 7,466 yards, and you have a lot of beefy par 4s, some longer par 3s too. This really add to that length. You have a few scoreable holes that definitely draw that average down, but some of the harder holes on property, you're looking at 475 yards plus for some of those longer par 4s, and of course 200 plus yard approaches into some of the more difficult par 3s. You do have large green complexes. That's maybe the one saving grace around an API, is that the green complexes are very similar to a PGA National. They have a lot of size to them, a lot of depth, and though there's a lot of contouring and speed on the greens around the API, you do have large targets to work with. So out of that deep 3-4 inch rough that you have around this golf course, you're at least going to have some room for air out there before you get into that deep lush rough around the green. Another difference at this golf course compared to what we had at PGA National would be we don't have as many shaved off fairway areas around the green at the API. It's more so that longer rough, that 3-4 inch Bermuda grass overseed, pretty much from tip to toe out there. Now, your fairways are pretty thin as well. They're about 25-30 yards wide, so it's hard to even hit the short stuff to begin with. So a lot of players that have skill out of the rough, whether it's on approach or around the green, are some of the players that you have seen win here before, right? Victor Hovland, without a win, has played extremely well here. Guys like Scotty Scheffler have some of the best rough stats in all of the entire PGA Tour, are the guys that have come here and consistently performed. So that's something to note. That rough is a perennial ryegrass this year. They have it listed at 3 inches, but no, that'll grow by the time they get to the start of play. And on top of that, it plays a lot thicker than its actual length. So I know it doesn't seem that daunting when it's listed at 3 inches, but just know that it typically plays a little bit more difficult than what you see over here on the tee sheet. Few other things to note is the fairway green birdie bogey averages are all harder than your PGA Tour average. So if we go over here to bet the number, of course, a fixture over here on these course breakdowns, code Gsluke for a discount any subscription over there. You can see the fairway rate is about 4 or 5% lower over the last 3 years here than compared to your tour average. Your green to regulation rate is almost a entire 10% lower, rate about 9% exactly compared to your tour average. Even your scrambling rate is a little bit lower than tour average. Birdies, bogeys, all harder to come by around this golf course. So you're going to be tested across the board. Around the green shots are difficult with that lush rough. Hitting the greens can be difficult when it plays firm and fast. And then off the tee, right, I already mentioned when you're in that rough, you're going to feel it, and you've got small targets out there, and it's not a short golf course. There's really nothing about this golf tournament that's easy. Right, every single part of your game is going to be well above average in terms of difficulty, which is why the winning score is often 10 under par or worse. It's why you have such a jam-packed leaderboard when it comes to studs. Now, I know Kurt Kitayama won this golf tournament. He broke the trend, by the way, of almost all the winners here having experience and having a top 20 before. I believe it was 7 of the last 8 winners have had a top 20 before they went out there and won this event. But look at the rest of the top 10, right? Harris English played really well here the year before this, so that's not a surprise so much. But look at the studs, right? Rory, Cantlay, Hatton, Scheffler, Spieth. A few surprises, I would say, in a Molinax and a Davis Riley, but the rest of the top 7 here, right, are all some of your top 20 players in the world. So this is even without at elevated status, right? A lot of these events aren't going to have nearly as strong a field is what we're going to have this time around. But back in 2022, you had Scotty winning, Hatton up there, guys like Hovland, Kirk, Woodland, Gooch, all world-renowned ball strikers that found themselves towards the top of the board. And we can really keep going back if we wanted to. The year that Bryson won, right? A lot of guys that maybe aren't as much of a fixture anymore, right? Especially Lee Westwood, right? Over there on the Live Tour. But a lot of the same types of players that succeed here that we see succeed at major championships, right? Bryson DeChambeau winning the U.S. Open, right? We go back here to a few years ago. Scotty Scheffler, of course, right? Guys like Terrell Hatton, guys like Hovland, right? Who's been competing in majors in contention quite a few times over the last year. Major championship Gary Woodland, right? Taylor Gooch, of course, with the asterisk comment. Was up there in the top 10 there a few years ago as well. The point is here is that your ball striking separates you from the field, right? Your around the green play matters. Your putting matters around this golf course. There's not necessarily one stat that we can hone in on and just try and make a player pool for this week, right? We can't just go out there and find our top 5 or outright bets by honing in on one stat. It takes a complete player. It takes a major championship caliber type of player to win at this golf course. And really the only exception to that rule would be a Kurt Kitayama, right? Our winners here have all been top tier guys, right? I know that only the last 3 years are clicked in here, but Scotty Scheffler, right? Bryson DeChambeau. I mean, look at these second place finishers, right? Hovland, Hatton, Rory, right? Even Billy Horschel, right? Seasoned veteran, right? Was up there in the top 2. You can't fake it around this golf course. You're going to see the cream of the crop separated out there, and you got to look at pretty much all 4 stat categories. So we will touch on a few key stats you can look at here towards the modeling section of the video, but it's going to take a well-rounded game to get it done around Bay Hill. Before we start talking some stats and some modeling stuff, let's go through a few of the holes here and give you an idea for the type of golf course we got at hand. So first off, hole number 1, a little bit of a dog leg from right to left. You can be a little bit more aggressive with the driver if you want to, but you're going to have something from a mid iron to maybe even a mid to long iron into the screen. And it's pretty narrow, I would say, right? You don't have a ton of depth to work with at hole number 1, but it is as easy as you're going to get out here, right? And that's a mid-length par 4, not all that easy when it's all said and done, but a lot of the holes out here get a lot more difficult. Hole 2 would certainly fit that bill. It is 227 yards. It plays ever so slightly downhill, but once again, an extremely narrow target. If you don't shape the ball the right way, it's pretty much impossible to hold the screen, especially when it's playing firm and fast. So once again, a pretty difficult start out here at Bay Hill, and we're going to get used to saying that quite a bit. Hole 3, also a dogleg from right to left. This one is 439 yards, and a lot of players will hit less than driver, right? You don't need it on this short of a hole. A lot of that is to avoid the water on the left, because this bailout to the right in the bunker doesn't leave for a lot of easy shots into the green. The bunkers here are not as easy to get contact out of as what you'll see at some other golf courses, so it's a little bit more of a penalty if you run through the short stuff there. Hole 4 is your first par 5. It is 589 yards. You do have OB down the right, but you do have to miss quite far offline to get to there. And it's not one that everyone is going to reach into, but most people are going to get it around the green into, right? Right around where this second marker is about 40, 50 yards short. If you hit it into this vicinity, you're going to have access to most of the pin locations, maybe except for this back left pin where you have, that bunker covering it over there in the left. You have to carry that to get it close. That's probably the only tough one to get to if you end up laying up short. Hole 5 is 387. It is back the other direction. It's a little dogleg from right to left. This is one of the easier holes out there, but once again, it's not the largest target. Again, these greens are actually pretty large, so they're probably a little bit larger than we can tell from the overhead looks, but the angles into the greens can be a little difficult. And then, of course, the bunkering and the around the green play is so punishing that it makes the greens play effectively smaller, right? You don't want to mess with any of that stuff on the sides. And a lot of guys, even to an easy hole like hole number 5, will just take aim at the center of the green and move on. Hole 6 is your next par 5. This one is a dogleg from right to left. This is the iconic hole, right? That, Bryson DeChambeau took it over the entire lake and tried to drive it up near the green. Succeeded in doing so, right? Did not make a great score on that hole, but just shows you the kind of golf course that we have here. A lot of risk reward around a Bay Hill Club and Lodge. And the ideal play, the one that most people will do, is hitting it over here near this marker. Some people will go for the green and 2. A lot will end up laying up over here near this marker. And quite a few fans, including myself this weekend, that'll be sitting up on this hill. Hole number 7 is 197 yards. This usually plays into a headwind with the predominant wind direction. It's a pretty average sized green. Some of the pins can get a little bit dicey, but it's another 200-yard approach shot into a par 3. Hole 8 is one of the most difficult holes on the entire course. In fact, sometimes it plays as the most difficult. If it plays into a headwind, just add even more difficulty here. But the rough, of course, makes it difficult to hit the approach shot because of this lake to the left. A lot of people end up going long, right, taking that water out of play. And then the whole green slopes from back to front here. And if you hit it in one of the bunkers, it's almost impossible up and down. So that's the real issue, right, is the bailout is no good. And if you end up hitting it in the water, you're even more so in trouble. Hole 9 is 490 yards. It is another extremely difficult hole. So I'd say 7 through 9 is one of the harder stretches on the golf course. And once again, if this plays into the wind, and it did for a few rounds last year, could end up one of the most difficult holes on property. I believe back in the day, this was a par 5 for the members that they converted into a par 4. So you do have a really large green. It is probably the largest green on the golf course, but a lot of movement to it and a ton of balls. I mean, it's got to be like 40-50% of approach shots that end up in these greenside bunkers. Hole 10 is 400 yards, so if you're starting on the backside, I'd say it's an easier start than what you have on the front. A little dogleg from left to right, so rather than that draw shape on the first 2, even 3 holes, over there on the front 9, you have a little fade off of hole number 10. So maybe you're more comfortable with that. It makes it an easier start, but also a more flat green over here on the backside, and one of the easier holes on the entire golf course. Hole 11 is a little dogleg from right to left, kind of like what you had with hole 3. A lot of people don't hit driver here, right? With that water to the left, you just want to take that out of play. Whether it's a driving iron, 3-wood, you hit it to the corner and leave yourself a short iron in, right? You're not going to have very long in, even if you lay up. Hole 12 is one of the next par 5s. This one is 570, kind of like you had with hole 4. A lot of people are going to reach this in 2, but even if you don't, you're going to be leaving yourself sub 100 yards in. So definitely a birdie look. You have to take advantage of the par 5s at API, or you're not going to keep it under par. Next up, we have hole 13. This one is 377, another shorter par 4, but is a little bit tricky with the water and then of course, bunkers over the green. If you take the water out of play, you bring on that bunker risk, and just like you had with hole number 8, all of the slope goes towards the water, making the up and down shots extremely difficult. Hole 14 is a longer par 3, once again a par 3 where you have 200 plus yards. 15 is 473. This one is a huge dogleg from left to right. So as you can see, there is one hole that goes from right to left over here on the back 9, but a lot of holes that favor that fade shape. Whereas on the front 9, right, there was a lot of holes that were fading that draw shape. Hole number 8 on the front 9 was another fade hole, so it's not completely homogeneous, right, between the two 9s, but you have to be able to move it in both directions. Regardless of your favored shape, there are holes that just require you to go out there and hit a shot shape, and if you can't do so, you're probably not going to hit that fairway. Hole number 16 is another par 5. This is your shortest on site. It usually plays a little bit longer than this 513, so I think they have a tee box that might be a little bit further back. You are going to see people that reach this in 2, but because of the water, you have to have a lie in the fairway, right? If you're hitting out of that 3-4 inch rough that we have at this golf course, a lot of people aren't going to take that risk on, but it is an extremely reachable par 5 if you can execute a tee shot, and one that you will see eagles at, which is great, right, for the end of the golf tournament, especially when you're trying to see some volatility. Hole 17 is your hardest par 3 on site. This one is 224, so just like all the par 3s, right, it's 200 plus yards. You have water over here that is in play if you end up hitting a horrible shot, and a green that has a ton of undulation on it. So if you miss the green, it's oftentimes one of the more difficult up and downs on property, and of course it's your second to last hole that you have to deal with. And then finally, hole 18, another hole with water to the right side. The tee shot here isn't all that difficult, but if you do miss, this rough to the right is some of the longest on site. Now, if you miss to the left, it's the proper miss because that's where the fans are. It'll be a little bit more trampled down, but at the same time, if it's a back right pin, it gives you a horrible angle in. So this hole in general is all about the drive. If you can hit a 3-wood, maybe a driver into the short stuff, you could leave a birdie look. You can see if you're aggressive, where you hit driver off hole 18, you might leave yourself 150 yards or less, but if you take it a little bit further back, it leaves 170 yards over the water. So you kind of have to decide on 18 whether you're going to take the risk off the tee, right, and try and hit something like a driver and set up a shorter shot, or take on that risk into the green with a longer iron shot if you decide to be more conservative with your off the tee play. So it's a great finishing hole. This course in general has a lot of strategy to it, and makes for a lot of volatility as well. Now that we've gone hole by hole, let's take a look at some of our key stats of the week that I'm using to identify my top fantasy and betting plays. So this is a course where we can't really just look at one thing, but there are a few key stats that we've noticed over the past few years or so that correlate to top end success. Of course, ball striking at this difficult of a course is going to be a factor, but in particular, your off the tee and approach play over the last, let's say, 12-24 rounds is going to be important here. The API is not a course where you want to find your game. You'll oftentimes hear that about a course like PGA National, and if you take a look at the top end of the leaderboard, I think outside of a David Skins, almost everyone up there was coming in with pretty solid form. Now, not always, next level, not always the best form in the field, but none of them were, hemorrhaging strokes to the field, right? David Skins probably the one exception with all those missed cuts, but this week it's that same type of idea. So whether it's off the tee play, right, sorting it by that, that is going to be a huge factor with all that rough out there, but approach play probably even more so. Now, over here on the BTN model, I believe they have it over the last 30 measured rounds. I might even go out there and make it a smaller sample size. So just for the sake of this, I'm going to go ahead and set this at the last, let's go 16 measured rounds. The main reason being is I want to look at the last month or so of play, right? I want to know how these guys are playing heading into this golf tournament and not some of the stuff from last season, right? Because if we use the last 30 rounds, a lot of the stats that we're pulling here are going to be from 2023. So I'm more so worried about how they're actually hitting the ball of late than what they have looked like over the last, let's say, 3-4 months, for example. So let me go ahead and adjust these on here, go ahead and apply those to our modeling. And what this is going to do is give us a good idea, right, of who's ball striking over the last month or so. So if we go to shots gained approach, you'll see number 1 is Tom Hoge. Number 2 is Jake Knapp after his Absolutely electric performance the last few weeks. Scotty Scheffler doing his thing. Christian Bezuidenhout absolutely striping it. Now, I know at the Cognizant, right, maybe not his best week, but that is always something worth looking at. Pavon with his form. Adam Scott maybe a little bit surprising to see there. Valimaki, Taylor, Colin Morikawa, Lowry. Now, a lot of these guys are just players playing well recently, but when we combine that with the off-the-tee play is where we can find some of our top-tier plays. So some of the better off-the-tee players of late, Sam Burns, Rory, Cam Young, who also has elite-level course history here. I promise you we'll talk about Cam Young later in the week. Somebody I've already gone out there and actually bet outright at this stage. But yeah, all the off-the-tee flushers. You got Murray up there. You got Victor Hovland popping in that category. Minwoo Lee, Patrick Rogers, Nikolai Hogard, Siwoo Kim are all players I'd consider for some value here. Now, in terms of guys that stick out, that are doing it across both ball striking categories, I mean, Xander Schauffele, he's an elite tier player, though, so we probably expect that. But EVR and Knapp, right, a little bit cheaper, right, 6,600 for EVR, 7,600 for Knapp, are gaining across both stat categories heading in here. Siwoo Kim, maybe not as much with the approach play, gaining across both ball striking categories. Did just have a child last week, though, so somebody down the Discord let me know that. I don't know if I'm worried about that with Siwoo Kim, but the form has definitely been there. Hogard, right, gaining across both categories. Corey Connors doing his thing there, but a lot of guys that are doing it in one category or the other. So ideally, right, we want guys that have found their game pretty much across the board, but if you can do it in one category or the other, that's a lot better than, let's say, being average in both categories. So off the tee play, approach play, right, always something you should be considering heading into an event, but even more so in my opinion than this golf course. Now, the one thing I really wouldn't look at, and it's not like it's not important, right? If somebody's putting well heading into the event, that's totally fine. That has to be a plus. But this isn't the type of week where I'm only looking at putters, right? Or really where I'm looking at putting all that much. So you can take a look at some of these guys. I mean, Jordan Spieth's putting it well. That's actually surprising to me, right? Last year was hemorrhaging strokes there. But Pavon, Burns, Taylor, Thigala, Brendan Todd, Denny McCarthy. My issue here is that I'm just not as big on the putting this week as other people are going to be. So these sort of players are likely going to be a little bit more popular for other people than they will be in my modeling. So sometimes I'd like to take a look at that right before we start a week. But a few key stats that I'm looking at in particular. So number one, bogey avoidance. At a golf course like this, there's an art form to course management. Some of your best course management players of late include Sam Burns, very surprisingly. So he's popping off the tee, he's popping with the putter, and he's popping with bogey avoidance. That's a good stat profile to have. Now, the approach play is not next level, but he's still gaining strokes on approach. How has he played here, right? Cut, T9, cut, and then a few made cuts back there in 2019, 2020. We'll have to keep an eye on good old Sam Burns. He's the number 2 model rank per the BTN model, right after changing some of the sample size on there. Something that's at least catching my eye. I hope he's low owned for DFS. That might be the spot to play a Sam Burns. But you got Scotty Scheffler towards the top of that list, Victor Hovland, 2 players that have been extremely good at the API. I mean, look at this, right? All those top finishes for Hovland. You have the win for Scotty, the 4th place last year that you can hone in on there. But JT, right, doesn't have a ton of experience here, but is a really good bogey avoidance player. Did finish in T21 his first start. Xander Schauffele popping up again. Xander Schauffele, I'm expecting to be very popular, but if he's going to be an averagely owned play, right, if not everyone's jumping on the Xander train this week, then I will, right, because the form makes sense. He's doing the 2 things with the ball striking that we're looking for, and he's good at bogey avoidance. And his course history, again, kind of like JT, he hasn't played here very much. He's at least been okay, right, when he showed up. He hasn't been great, though. Siwoo Kim showing up again. So course history has not been there for Siwoo Kim, but again shows up across both ball striking categories and showing up from bogey avoidance. So perhaps somebody that can turn it around here in 2024, maybe with some of that baby swag that he has, will go out there and have a week. I can just see the narratives now running rampant out there with Siwoo Kim. Kurt Kitayama, a player that's really good at bogey avoidance. So, of course, your winner here last year, and gaining very sneakily across both stat categories with ball striking. He's gaining off the tee. He's gaining on the approach play. Putter, I'm not all that worried about. Again, if there's any stat category that I'm maybe a little bit lower on this week than most, it's that putter. And Kurt Kitayama sneakily might be a play again. So he snuck up on us last year, right? Not many people were expecting him to go out there and win this event. But if anything, he models better for this year than he did for last. And now he has that experience in the win. So once again, Kurt Kitayama, if he's chalky, I might be out on him. This is just a tough course. It's pretty volatile too with all that water out there. But if he's sneaky low owned, then sure, by all means, right? I'll buy back in on my boy Kurt. Patrick Cantlay, Nick Taylor showing up. Not the best off the tee. Also not a very strong player in terms of ball speed. So that kind of worries me about Nick Taylor and his ability to get out of that rough. But really good bogey avoidance, really good approach play. So you got to give him credit for that. Jake Knapp showing up again. This kid's just a stud. Another guy to keep an eye on in terms of ownership. If he's low owned, fire him up. Jordan Spieth, of course, he has really good course history here. 2 top 5 finishes in a row when he showed up to the API. I'll be betting him because I'm a Jordan sucker, but does have a few things going for him in terms of his stat profile. Guys like Tommy Fleetwood up there in terms of a bogey avoidance, Jason Day and whatnot. Some of these guys, though, like especially like Fleetwood, not doing well with the ball striking of late. So these sort of plays, they can get there, right? If you're going to hone in on anything, I guess it would be that bogey avoidance. But I prefer these guys a little bit further up that are also, right, putting out solid shots gained metrics with their ball striking. So that's what I'd be looking at with a lot of my modeling. If you're going to hone in on a specific proximity range when it comes to your approaches, make it the mid to long irons, right? A lot of those par 3s are 200 to 225 yards. A lot of your par 4s, with the exception of like 3 or 4 of them, are going to be from like 150 to 200 yard approaches. So by looking at 165 to 230, in my model, I'm going to be looking at a lot from 150 to 175, also a lot from 175 to 200, sprinkling in some 200 to 225 too. Those are going to be my highest weighted proximity ranges for approach play. So if you want to take a look at this specific range, top of that would be guys like an Adam Scott, Ludwig Aberg, who, it'll be his second time playing here. He did play here last year as an amateur and finished in the top 25. So, and that was actually with a late little blow up, I should say. He kind of melted down towards his last 5 or 6 holes, but very impressive in his first time around here, and is $9,500 now, right? So a little bit of a different scenario for Aberg, much higher expectations here in 2024, but a player that really thrives with those mid to long irons. Guys like Tom Hoagie, Will Zalatoris, Keegan Bradley, Scotty Scheffler, Jake Knapp are all players that excel in that specific category. So going ahead and just sorting this by the BTN model here, let's take a look at who they're looking at the most this week. So once again, we've adjusted a little bit in terms of the sample size, but looking at the stats over the last month or so, it's Jake Knapp, number 1, number 2, Sam Burns, who again is just showing up in a lot of the categories we're looking at, which makes him an intriguing play, that's for damn sure. All of the stats are telling us to play Sam Burns, so I might as well oblige. You got guys like Matthew Pavon up there, Scotty Scheffler. This is a great course for Scotty. Xander Schauffele, guys like Adam Scott, JT Aberg up there in the top 10. Guys like Wyndham Clark, of course, he's kind of been sneaky, right, since winning that golf tournament at Pebble. His power, right, his ability to win a U.S. Open, right, should translate pretty well over here to the Arnold Palmer Invitational. Cam Young, maybe my favorite play so far of this week, up there at number 13 in their model. I love to see that, a little bit of a reassurance, seeing that they agree with my take there. Siwoo Kim, potentially a sneaky play. We've mentioned his name more than a few times already. Eric Cole, who completely burned everyone over there at the Cognizant. Didn't play him last week. I have a pretty good idea for when to play Eric Cole or not. At low ownership and at a lower price tag, it's going to be a week to dish him out here. And I know the ball striking stats don't look quite as good as they should because of how poorly, or how much he ejected over there at the Cognizant Classic. But he's a sneaky bounce back candidate. So I'll probably take a gander on him in a few lineups, right? I'm just hoping for him to return to his baseline. A few other guys up here in the top 25. Rory, right, maybe a little bit lower than I would have expected. Same thing with Victor Hovland. Both are players I would expect to probably play better here than their ranking, especially with the course history, right? Rory McIlroy's won this event before, finished in second last year, 5th and 6th place, right, over his last 5 seasons. Hovland himself, I mean, right, pretty decent course history there too. That's intriguing, though, to see that they're a little bit lower in this model. And now for a few comp courses to consider to go out there and take a look at some of your corollary analysis. So first off, we got the Players Championship, TPC Sawgrass, another Florida track where you've got some difficult approach shots. I'd say a similar approach profile compared to what we're going to have this week. A lot of those mid to long irons. And on top of that, you've got a course with a lot of water in play, the same kind of feel. A lot of that risk reward aspect that you're going to get at both tracks is something that really defines the golf tournament. So the rough, a lot shorter around the players. That definitely gives it a little bit of a different feel. But once again, a lot of guys that have succeeded at the API, right? I'm talking Scotty, of course, has won both golf tournaments, have found success over here as well. So part of it's the agronomy, right? Agronomy very similar, especially because the courses are only a couple hours apart. So definitely a few guys that you could look at that have succeeded well there that you might want to look to this week. So just taking a look at the Players Championship the last few years, Terrell Haddon, of course, finished in second to Scotty last year. No Terrell Haddon in this field, but Tom Hoagie played well. Victor Hovland, right, a guy that's popped at both golf courses. Hideki seems to play well at difficult tracks, so he's potentially a guy to keep an eye on. Cam Davis, another guy to potentially keep an eye on. And Minwoo down here, right, just got into the field via the Aeon Swing 5, another player that I think might be a sleeper for this golf tournament. You go back to a few years ago when Cam Smith won. Of course, you had Arnaban Lahiri up there, Paul Casey, right, guys on the Live Tour, but some guys you probably wouldn't expect, right? Like a Kevin Kisner, right? That's really good on Bermuda, really good mid to long iron player that didn't really get it done off the tee. So I would say API maybe a little bit more demanding when it comes to the off the tee play, but a lot of the guys you'd expect, right? Guys like a Victor Hovland, right? Showing up again. DJ Straka, ball strikers that we've just come used to seeing at the top of these leaderboards. Keegan Bradley up there in that top 5. A lot of players that are consistent from tee to green and that pop on Bermuda grass. So the one thing that you see in a lot of leaderboards down here in Florida are that the guys that are from South Florida that are either grew up down in this area or just familiar with the grass tend to have a lot more success than the guys that are West Coast players that are maybe coming over from the DP World Tour, right, and aren't used to playing on grainy Bermuda grass. You have seen that at the players. You've also seen that on API leaderboards, which is oftentimes why I look to these Florida golf courses for a lot of my comps. Next up, speaking of, we have last week's golf tournament, right? The Cognizant Classic. This is also going to be a decent comp, right? I already mentioned that it's another difficult Florida track with a lot of water. And kind of like the players, not a lot of rough out there, right? The rough's not nearly as lush as what you're going to get for this week at the API. But of course, Austin Eckroat, right, winner out there today. Got to see that live, actually, out there with some Monday golf action. But Minwoo showing up. Another, little Minwoo sighting, right? He showed up at the Players last year. I'm liking that a whole lot for the API. Eric Van Rooyen with incredible form, obviously, after that this week. There's some guys that showed up at this year's Cognizant that I think you might want to take a look at for this golf tournament. Now, Shane Lowry's one, right? Really balanced player, right? Gains at the ball striking for sure. You'd like taking him at difficult golf courses. Jake Knapp, right, was towards the top of our models, right? Played pretty well. Cam Young, right? My first bet of the week. We'll talk about him on my DFS preview later on, right? Up there in the top 4. It's not only a good course to look at from last week's success, but in general, I think it's a pretty decent comp course. And looking to last year, Chris Kirk up there, Eric Cole, right? Eric Cole, a player that I think might be worth looking for a bounce back this week, ended up finishing well there. Shane Lowry again, Sepp Straka again. Straka might actually be a little bit of a sleeper for this week's event that you might want to keep an eye on. And if you go to the year before that, that's of course when Sepp won. Shane was up there again. Kurt Kitayama. Now this is the big one, right? Kurt Kitayama showing up, nearly winning the Cognizant 3 or 4 years ago when it was the Honda. Won the API last year, right? And we had almost no evidence to go out there and play Kurt Kitayama. Well, maybe if we had considered PGA National a little bit more as a comp, we could have gone to Kurt Kitayama, right, as a winner the last year. So I didn't bet him. I wish I did, of course, at that big number. PGA National was a comp course I was looking at last year, but I wasn't considering it as much, kind of like a Players Championship because of the lack of rough. But now after seeing some of this data over the last day or so, I've come along, right, on a PGA National and a TPC Sawgrass. So, of course, you could look at Daniel Berger's played well. I don't believe he's in this week's field, though. But a couple guys you might want to consider for your lineups. The last comp we're going to go with is probably the most sketchy of all of them, but it's the Farmers Insurance Open. It's because of the length of the rough. Right now, agronomy, completely different, but it's another long, hard par 72 with difficult, hard to hit fairways, also difficult, slopey, fast greens. The issue is that this course has no elevation change, right? You have some elevation change at the Farmers. Completely different part of the country, right? So the grasses are about as different as humanly possible, but the ball striking, the types of players, right, that have shown up at the Farmers are the types of players we expect to see succeeding at the API. So I don't think it's as much of a one-to-one here, but Jake Knapp, right, top 3 again. I mean, he just keeps showing up. Like, I'm gonna have to get exposure there at some point because of how much he's showing up. But guys like Hogard, of course, right, Pavon won this year, and of course he was towards the top of a lot of our modeling, so that's good to see. Kevin Yu, let's look at last year, right, get a better idea. Keegan Bradley showing up again. You know, he's shown up at a few of our comps. Somebody that I'm probably gonna have to take a little dabble on in terms of exposure this week. Max Homa played well at the Players last year too, so another instance of him popping up at a comp course. But a lot of these guys are just ball strikers, right? I mean, the Farmers is one of those events where we just take a look at shots gained tee to green and then try and figure out who to play. I'd say the API is that same kind of thing, right? Where it's all about that tee to green play. It's that major championship type of skill set that goes out there and finds success, which is why I like this golf course so much. Players Championship, same thing with PGA National. It's not as much of a priority to have that tee to green play, but it certainly is at the Farmers. So in the years past, right, Farmers has been one of my bigger comps. Always the gripe has been about the agronomy, but from the ball striking and skill set perspective, a lot of crossover that we can look at. So I'd put it at number 3 on my comp list. It's not my favorite because of some of the differences, but a similar type of skill set and a lot of leaderboard crossover that I think could be especially useful. Alrighty guys, that is all I've got for this week's course breakdown. Appreciate the support here as per usual and excited to hop into all the content this week out there for the API. I plan on being there probably Saturday and Sunday this weekend, so looking forward to seeing some golf, but in general, should be a really exciting week out there for betting in DFS. Anytime we have the world's top players, a golf course like Bay Hill, it's one to take advantage of and one that is probably going to get a lot of attention from the casuals out there. So probably going to be a lot of eyes on golf this weekend, which is of course great for the sport. And again, looking forward to it all out there. Appreciate the support again. Go ahead, comment down below what you guys have as your winning score of the week for a free chance to earn a month of my Patreon page. On there, of course, is where I'm posting all my modeling. So after I get my custom model finalized here over the next hour or so, that'll be posted for all my members. My DFS projections will be posted there. All the different sheets that I'm using for research will be posted there for all my Patreon members. And there's betting and DFS stuff on there as well. So if you want a free chance to earn that month of the Patreon page, go ahead, let me know your winning score down in the comments, and if you get that, go ahead and earn that free month there. You can, just pay for it yourself if you want. If you just want to get in right now, you want to get access to that, go ahead and check out the link in the description, but that's all I've got for you guys this week. Should be a fun one. Best of luck out there with your exposure, and I'll see you guys a little bit later on this evening for our DFS and betting preview.